So the last topic we need to kind of cover is going to be the second law of thermodynamics, which talks about the direction of heat flow. This kind of leads into the topic of entropy. And essentially, I've already told you several times, but heat is never going to spontaneously flow from a cold one to a hot one. It's always going to flow from hot to cold. I always like to kind of think of this as water flows downhill, right? So if here we have maybe some hot water, and here we have some cold water, the direction of heat flow is always going to be in that direction right there. So this is kind of the downhill direction. So in the summertime, the heat's going to flow from the hot air outside of your house into the cool interior, which kind of sucks. And the opposite is going to be true in the wintertime. The heat's going to flow from the warm inside to the cold outside. Never going to spontaneously flow in the other direction. Now, you may be saying to yourself, well, wait a minute, I know that refrigerators work, I know that air conditioners work, and it turns out that yes, we can actually make heat flow from the cold to hot, but it's never going to happen spontaneously. It's going to happen only, and I'm going to underline only several times, only when work is done on the system, and you need to add energy to the system for that to happen. So, you need to plug your refrigerator in, you need to plug your air conditioner in, you need to pay for all that electricity. So yes, we can make heat flow from cold to hot, but not without adding energy. It's never going to spontaneously happen. It turns out, however, that we can use the second law of thermodynamics that says heat's going to flow from hot to cold to build something called a heat engine. And that heat engine is going to let you pick off a little bit of that heat flow and use it. So every heat engine is going to have a hot temperature reservoir, and it's going to have a cold temperature reservoir. It says, okay, well, heat is naturally going to flow in that direction right over there, just like water flows downhill. Now, what I can kind of do is I can pick off some of that energy. So this is kind of some heat energy leaving the system. And I can pick some of that off, and I can dump whatever is left back to the cold reservoir. So it's going to gather some heat from the hot temperature reservoir. It's going to convert some, underline some, of this heat into mechanical work, and it's going to dump the rest into the cold temperature reservoir. Now, kind of a key word here is some. If we kind of use my water analogy, we can use the fact that water flows downhill, and we can stick a paddle wheel in there. With that paddle wheel can turn a mill, or it can turn a generator, or something like that. But we can't just suck all the water out of a stream. We have to dump it somewhere. Heat engines have to do the same thing. They have to dump some of their heat energy somewhere. So we can only convert some of it, right? If we have 100 joules coming out right here, we can't convert 100 joules into work. Maybe we have to dump 50 joules into the cold reservoir, and we can only do 50 joules worth of work. So energy still has to be conserved. Now, all I really want to stress with this slide is, and this is going to apply to all heat engines, is we can only convert some of the input heat into work. We can't convert all of that. So think about my water analogy, right? We can't just suck up all of a river. Every heat engine is going to expel some heat. So, the hood of a car is going to become hot. We're going to have hot air coming out of a bacon oven, everything like that. So there's got to be some heat dumped to the cold reservoir at some point. Now it turns out that the maximum possible efficiency of a heat engine is actually going to depend on the temperatures of the reservoirs. And kind of the efficiency, what that's going to relate is going to be how much work you can do relative to much heat that you can pull in. So that's kind of what the efficiency gives you. And it's going to depend, for all sakes and purposes of this class, on the temperature of the hot and the cold reservoir. And we kind of calculate it as such. The efficiency is going to be the difference in the temperatures divided by the temperature of the hot. One thing to keep in mind is always work in Kelvin. We can't be working in Celsius at this point. Now, do keep in mind that in real heat engines, the efficiency is actually slightly less than this, simply because we have this nasty creature called friction. One thing that's kind of interesting is as this difference in the hot and cold temperature reservoirs goes up, the efficiency goes up. So larger temperature difference means larger efficiencies. So maybe take a second and see if you can calculate the efficiency of this setup right here, where this is going to be the temperature of the hot reservoir, right? It's hotter. It's the temperature of the cold. efficiency is simply going to be temperature of the hot minus temperature of the cold divided by temperature of the hot. So that's going to be 400 minus 300 divided by 400, or 100 divided by 400, or a quarter. And one thing to note is the efficiency of an engine will never be larger than 1, right? Having efficiency larger than 1 says you can do more work than heat you can put in. So the efficiency will always be smaller than 1. Now, the last concept I want to talk about is that of entropy, and really it's quite related to the second law of thermodynamics. Now, entropy, that's just a fancy word for disorder, and it turns out that in natural processes that high quality energy tends to turn into low quality energy, or ordered things tend to become more disordered. And so this is also kind of like saying heat's always going to flow from hot to cold. If you think about this, if you have something that is cold, it's going to be very ordered. So I'm kind of drawing a little lattice right over here. Something that's very hot, maybe a chunk of iron that's very hot, it's going to be a lot less ordered. There's going to be a lot more motion over here. These guys are bumping into each other and so on and so forth, and they're going to bump into the things that are next to them. They're going to bump into those, bump into those, bump into those, and these guys are going to be wiggling a lot more. And so as heat flows from hot to cold, it's going, it's tending to make things that are nice and ordered, the cold things, into more disordered. And this is just kind of the way that processes occur in nature, and they're never going to go from disorder to order, from cold to hot, without any assistance. So in essence, what we're saying is that this thing called entropy, or disorder, is always going to increase. Kind of, like when you walk into your nice clean room and you kick off your shoes and you toss down your backpack on the bed, it just kind of naturally becomes more and more and more disordered. Yes, you can go ahead and clean it, but that's kind of that external assistance that we're talking about. Kind of an example of things going from disordered to ordered is, take a look at this picture right over here, 1, 2, 3, and you ask yourself, does this make sense? No, this does not make sense. We're not going to have a coffee cup spontaneously jump up, fly into midair, go back up on the table perfectly reformed. Now, the more likely scenario is that it's going to go in this direction right here. It's going to be a nice ordered process. Go to this one and go to this one. The same is true for heat flow. Flowing from a hot object to a cold object, it's going to tend to make things more disordered. Think about dropping an egg. It's going to look kind of similar to this coffee cup. It's going to go from ordered to disordered. Or even shuffling a new deck of cards, right? You get a new deck of cards and all the diamonds are together, all the hearts are together, and it's even, ace, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You shuffle them, and it's very unlikely that they're going to end up more ordered than when you started. So, well, why do we care? Why are we talking about entropy? Well, it turns out that heat flow is a one-way street. It tends to go from hot to cold. It tends to go to ordered from disordered, and it's never going to go backwards unless you add energy to the system. So what it kind of boils down to is you just can't turn the heat that's inside of your home back into electrical energy, or at least not very efficiently. Now, this leads to an interesting concept, and it's called the heat death of the universe. And essentially, if things are always becoming more disordered, if the net entropy is constantly increasing or running downhill, then someday all we're going to have left is low quality energy. And I kind of say net because yes, we can actually reorganize and concentrate energy. For example, if you think about a plant, right? A plant is going to survive by organizing energy from various food sources, and it is becoming more ordered. However, at some point, then the plant's going to die, and when the plant does die, then it tends to become more disordered. It turns out that it's even more disordered than if the plant had been there in the first place. Now, don't want to end on a bad note, so the heat death of the universe is not going to happen for like billions and billions and billions and trillions and gazillions of years. So it's not something that we ever have to worry about in our lifetimes or for a very, very